Good morning.
Good morning, Sister.
Our capstone presentation this morning is from Colleen Fontenot, and this is her thesis statement. The Montessori Method, grounded in Catholic anthropological principles, offers a holistic pedagogy that not only challenges the utilitarian focus of mainstream American education, but also nurtures the intellectual, physical, and spiritual development of the elementary age child. Please welcome Colleen.
Imagine two classrooms. In the first, rows of elementary age children sit quietly at their desks, each staring at the front of the room as a teacher writes notes on the board. Efficient, structured, predictable. Now picture another room. Here, a child kneels on a rug, carefully arranging wooden number rods, discovering for herself the relationship between size and quantity. Across the room, two students lean over a book, engaged in a spontaneous discussion about a story they chose to read together. Which of these environments fosters a love of learning? Which of these children will leave the classroom not just with knowledge, but with a deep and abiding curiosity about the world? Education at its heart is not just the transmission of facts, but the awakening of wonder. Maria Montessori understood this, and her method was born out of a radical conviction that children, when given the right environment, will seek knowledge for themselves. Today I want to explore how the Montessori Method, grounded in Catholic anthropological principles, offers a holistic pedagogy that nurtures the intellectual, physical, and spiritual development of the elementary age child. The Montessori Method was founded in 1907 by an Italian physician, Dr. Maria Montessori. After gaining her degree, she stayed in Rome to serve at a hospital, working mostly with the poor, particularly children. Her humane care for her patients became recognized as she treated the illness of the patient while also providing for their personal needs and comfort. A year after receiving her doctorate, she began to volunteer at a psychiatric clinic, which provided help for children with mental and emotional challenges. This developed her interest in psychology, as she formed the belief that the surroundings of the child, which were bare and simple in the clinic, were impelling him to actions such as eating crumbs off of the floor due to a lack of activity and stimulation in which he could engage. It is from her reading and work with these children that she formed the opinion that lack of adequate provision for children with mental and emotional challenges was a cause of their delinquency, which then inspired her promotion of reform necessary in the education of children. Her renowned skill in educating became recognized, and she was appointed as co-manager of an orthophrenic school, which focused on sanity and sound intellect. As her interest in this field increased, she began to view her role with the children from the perspective of an educator rather than solely a doctor. After working for the orthophrenic school, she left to conduct her own studies, mainly philosophy of education. In 1915, Montessori related observations of her early experiences, which influenced this change in her focus. She witnessed a young girl who was wholly absorbed in her concentration of placing blocks and cylinders into a wooden frame, satisfied and attracted by this activity. The child only left her task when she had completed all she could accomplish with it. Montessori observed the girl's behavior and wondered how it was she could be so wholly concentrated on this seemingly limited activity. Along with other similar encounters, her observation served as a major influence, both in founding her pedagogy and in the philosophy behind her methods. As her proficiency in these fields increased, and she became noted for her success, the Rome real estate business asked her to conduct the education of the children in their buildings. This gave her the opportunity to test her method. Calling these schools children's homes, she began to educate the children, and the results showed great success. So what principles did Montessori discover about the way children learn upon which she founded her pedagogy? There are 5 key principles on which the Montessori classroom functions. First, Montessori saw value in the intercollaboration of children of mixed ages in the classroom. It provides space for leadership from older students who can share and display what they have already learned. Within her design, younger students can practice their ability to learn from the more experienced. Ultimately, they cultivate a sense of friendship which enables them to share and relate to each other. Second, the prepared environment. Arising from her discoveries about the child's ability to absorb, Montessori recognized the importance of meticulously choosing the surroundings of the child, which will best cater to the children's education. In her book, The Absorbent Mind, Montessori wrote of this ability, explaining, "The child has a type of mind that absorbs knowledge and instructs himself." She uses the example of children learning their parents' language simply by being exposed to it. She states, "Psychologists say that if we compare our ability as adults to that of the child, it would require us 60 years of hard work to achieve what the child has achieved in the first 3 years." Thus, Montessori classrooms are set up with various learning manipulatives oriented toward the student's absorbing ability through which they learn a skill. Third, the sensed experience, utilizing the abilities of each of the 5 faculties. Both an indoor and outdoor environment are thoughtfully incorporated into a school day. Since the person is both body and soul, Montessori realized the value of utilizing the body to aid in learning through hands-on activity, as well as nurturing the physical through incorporation of outdoor experience. Fourth, the need for the child to cultivate attention without distraction. In Montessori pedagogy, it is believed that the motivation for the child to learn is developed through actual experience of learning, which is the reward in itself. Montessori argued, "Our aim, therefore, is not merely to make the child understand, but to so touch his imagination as to enthuse him to his inmost core. We do not want complacent pupils, but eager ones." When a system encourages children to learn, seek education for themselves, and so construct their own potential, students are more motivated to learn. Further, through the engagement of the child in his own education, he is more able to internalize what he is learning. It is because of the importance of the prepared environment and other values of the method that the 5th principle arises, the necessity of an adequately trained teacher. Montessori recognized the need for real training for those who wish to carry on her methods in the classroom. In her book, Pedagogical Anthropology, she wrote, "The subject of our study is humanity. Our purpose is to become teachers. Now what really makes a teacher is love for the human child, for it is love that transforms the social duty of an educator into the higher consciousness of a mission." Emphasizing the unique development of each child, the Montessori instructor assumes facilitative rather than directive role in educating. Montessori ultimately provides the elementary age child with a more holistic education as compared to the mainstream American method. The goal of mainstream education revolves around earthly success, academic acknowledgement, and prestige, a truly utilitarian approach. Its purpose is to prepare students to lead the most successful lives above any other goal, encouraging the attachment to the temporal and reducing education to a tool. Such education is not based on the mastery of skills, but on all achieving equal standards. Montessori, on the other hand, seeks to form the whole person, thus providing a more fulfilling and effective education. In contrast to Montessori mixed-age classrooms, the mainstream schools group children only with others of similar age. Each of these age groups is separated from the others. This individualization does not allow for multi-age collaboration as Montessori does, because the less proficient do not have the opportunity to learn from the more experienced, and likewise, the more experienced are unable to aid the less proficient. Although there can still be interlevel learning within a classroom of children of homogeneous age, the children's proficiencies will not differ enough to allow for sufficient development of these skills. With the focus on the teacher in the front of the room, often lecturing to the students, the American mainstream widely differs from the child-centered Montessori approach. Elizabeth Dykins interviewed multiple teachers in both Montessori and public systems, concluding that Montessori was more focused on the mainstream, while the Montessori was geared toward the person. It is because of this focus that the mainstream repudiates mistakes and even discourages them, to the extent that external rewards are given for fewer mistakes, thus the grading system. Mainstream education often uses this method of external punishments and rewards as the influence for motivation. However, Montessori seeks to inspire the student to learn for the sake of education, rather than solely for success or career-oriented ends, thus allowing and even encouraging mistakes to learn from. By approaching education in a child-centered way, Montessori students learn oriented toward becoming more human rather than toward entering a system. It seems that Montessori would accomplish little due to lack of organized and prepared class time, a principle of the mainstream. However, students educated in the Montessori method compare just as well as to those who attend mainstream schools, often surpassing. A study conducted on students in South Carolina compares results in ELA, math, science, and social studies between Montessori and non-Montessori public schools. The results showed that Montessori students scored significantly higher in each of these areas, as well as showing high completion in meeting or exceeding the state standards. In another category of comparison between Montessori and non-Montessori, produced results that Montessori students performed about 1/3 of a standard deviation higher than students in traditional education on non-academic outcomes, including self-regulation, executive function, well-being at school, social skills, and creativity. This study proves that Montessori does not create social deficiency in children, but provides them with a comparatively superior education. Montessori students not only develop applicable life skills, but also have sufficient study in core subjects. Thus, by providing an education that mostly exceeds the mainstream academically, while also nurturing the physical and spiritual, Montessori proves to be a superior education in its holistic method. The Montessori approach aligns with the ideals of Catholic anthropological principles much more than the American mainstream. Anthropology can be defined as the study of being human in light of God's love, and the study of God's love in the light of being human. Through Montessori's desire for students to learn what it means to be human, she designed her method to approach education with this in mind. Aligning with Catholic anthropology allows the Montessori method to form the child according to his natural development and nurture each unique individual child. Herself a Catholic, Dr. Montessori naturally laid the foundations of her method in Catholic principles. Inspired by the Church's beliefs about the life of the family and the dignity of the human person, she geared her education toward upholding these standards. In her book, The Child and the Church, Maria Montessori states, "Education should be geared toward a formation of the person as a whole, in both his mind and body. In Catholic education, it should also focus on the spirituality of its students." These principles of education, in which Montessori proves to provide a more holistic method than the American mainstream, are evidence that this pedagogy is a better method of education. In order for there to be a revolution in the way that children are educated today, Montessori-inspired changes should be made in classrooms and even in homes that allow children to foster and develop. Students should be encouraged in their independence and creative skills. Their moral character should be built up. The evidence of the efficacy and impact on children who have participated in Montessori programs should encourage a recognition of its value. The implementation of this method is not confined to a school institution alone, but can be emulated in a child's home or homeschool program. Further, the method itself is not limited to a system of schooling, but rather becomes a philosophy of education. Maria Montessori recognized the immense impact education can have, and thus she takes her role as an educator seriously. She writes in Education and Peace, "An education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. It involves the spiritual development of man, the enhancement of his value as an individual, and the preparation of young people to understand the times in which they live." As compared to the modern American mainstream system of education, the pedagogy of Maria Montessori seeks more fully to become this education which is capable of saving humanity. By virtue of its holistic alignment with Catholic anthropology, its cultivation of the child's wonder, and its natural order of development. Returning to the images of the two classrooms from the beginning, which would we rather have for our students? The success-seeking, entirely structured, teacher-centered classroom, of the American mainstream, or the child-centered, holistic, human education of the Montessori method. Ultimately, if we as Catholics view attaining heaven as the highest goal of life on earth, then it is of utmost urgency to ensure that our children receive a good education and are formed in both body and soul. We should seek to revert education to higher standards in which students desire to learn, and teachers actively pursue the goal of aiding them in their education. If the goal of education is for students to learn about and experience the grandeur of God's creations on earth, intellectually, physically, and spiritually, rather than to merely capture earthly success, then in comparison to mainstream education, Montessori is the better pathway to that goal. Thank you.
We'll begin with questions from the faculty, please.
Mr. Bergen.
Thank you for your presentation. You focus on the Montessori method, and the main focus of that method seems to be on elementary school, right?
Yes.
Do you think that it would be helpful to apply some of those methods, some of those Montessori methods to higher grades, in high school? And if so, how would, what would that look like?
Thank you for your question. So as you said, I did focus on the elementary age in my research and in how that's applied, the Montessori method is applied in the elementary age. So I did not really look into high school education, but I can speak to what I do know. I believe that the Montessori that I'm talking about, the way that it's implemented for elementary, I believe is particularly capable of forming the elementary age child because of the level that they're at and the intrinsic motivation that they're displaying. And as the child gets older, I believe that there's more need for direct teaching from the teacher in the classroom. And so I think in high school education, the Montessori method is changed slightly in the way that they approach different subjects and things like that. So it can still be implemented, and there are Montessori high schools, but I was focusing on the elementary, and I also have found that it's slightly different in the way that it is implemented in the high school. Ms. Malonzo.
Thank you for your presentation, Colleen. I have a question. Since it seems to be booming around homeschool collectives and homeschool parenting and whatnot lately, can parents who are not trained in Montessori be effective if they choose to homeschool, or if they choose a homeschool collective? Is that some sort of, can you speak on what the level of training maybe a parent would need to do that at home for their elementary age children?
Thank you for your question. So the level of training that's required for example, a parent to educate their own child really does not have to be very official at all. They don't have to have a official certification to be a Montessori teacher in order to educate their own child in a homeschool in the Montessori method. However, I believe that it is important that the parent understands the philosophy of the methods so that it is implemented correctly, which could include just reading about how the method is implemented, how it works, so that whenever they're educating their own child, they're able to foster the child's intrinsic motivation and their own desire and the child's desire to learn, which is different than how it is done in a mainstream school. So perhaps the education that they have will not be the same that they will be giving to their child. So I think it's important that they know how the method, the philosophy behind the method, so that they can best nurture their child's natural desire to learn.
Okay, quick follow-up. There's misconceptions that unschooling is using the Montessori method. Could you speak to the difference between someone who chooses to unschool versus someone who chooses the Montessori method for their children at home?
Could you give a quick description of unschooling?
It kind of follows the idea of natural, intrinsic adoration for their environment. If the child wants to read, they will naturally ask to read, and so on. So it's not, unschooling is letting the child lead rather than the person, not teacher or parent and whatnot, kind of say, okay, today we're gonna go outside and we're gonna look for this. Ask me any questions that you have, as opposed to the child leading the unschooling.
Thank you for your question. So I think in the way that the child's natural desire to learn is nurtured in both is a similarity between them. However, I think in Montessori, from what you're saying about unschooling, it seems like Montessori is more focused on, there are requirements that the child, it is laid out what is expected of the child that right now we are learning. Right now is the time for you to be, maybe the child is choosing what they want to focus on in that time, but there are specific times that like a learning period of time. Rather than unschooling, it sounds like the child just leads the way entirely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Colleen, for your talk. It really touched my heart. My name is Ms. Muto. I had a quick question about when you're trying to start this in your home. From my own experience, I've been able to set up somewhat of an environment for my little one, but I sometimes get discouraged because many of the materials are expensive. When it comes to buying what is suggested after you've been informed in this method, do you have any suggestions for what a parent or a teacher could do to provide the best environment for their child while not having to, I guess, purchase all the materials that's suggested at the formations?
Thank you for your question. So the environment, as you mentioned, is a very important part of the Montessori education, and providing that environment is very necessary in nurturing the child in the Montessori way. So I think since most of them, or a lot of them, can be expensive, I think there are ways that perhaps you could use supplement with like less expensive material, and then using your own recognition of how this can help the child learn something. You can use your own materials and implement those into your own homeschooling or environment So rather than buying the branded Montessori materials, you can buy cheaper ones that you recognize can nurture the same skill in the child, or even just using certain toys that the children have to oriented toward learning something from them.
So what I'm hearing is you focus more on the philosophy and the skills you're trying to attain and kind of use what you have around you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any senior questions?
Joe.
Thank you for your presentation. So you mentioned that one of the primary features of a Montessori education is that the older students help to mentor some of their younger peers. I was wondering, could this potentially slow down the older students' own education, or how does the Montessori method avoid this from happening?
Thank you for your question. So in the Montessori method, since it's a multi-age classroom, the older students have the opportunity to help the younger ones, and the younger ones have that opportunity to learn from more experience. However, it's not everything is set up where the older students are always helping the younger students, so they're each progressing in their education as much as they can. However, it's often that the older students have already learned this skill that the younger students are working on. So in the natural day of the prepared environment, the older students might see a younger student struggling with something and be able to go in and help them with that. And the younger student, seeing the example of the older student, can learn from that. But it's not solely oriented toward the older student always helping the younger student, or the younger student learning from the older student. So they're both progressing.
Thank you.
Amelia.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm wondering, what kind of virtues does it take for teachers in the Montessori method to develop that love of learning in students and for it to be like truly child-centered?
Thank you for your question. I think two that are particularly necessary for a teacher in the Montessori method would be patience and humility. Patience, because as an adult working with the children requires a lot of patience and understanding that they're seeking to learn, but that's not always going to be in the way that you expect that they are going to be learning. So patience is required so that you can allow them to progress without hindering that. And then also humility, in that as somebody who already knows the answers, it's going to be tempting to just reveal them to the child whenever they're still in the thick of discovering. And so I think that humility is necessary, because you have to recognize that even though you know the answers, the child is still discovering.
Thanks.
Gabrielle.
Thank you for your presentation, Colleen. You mentioned that one of the principles of the Montessori method was the incorporation of like the outside environment. Can you explain a little bit about what that would look like in a school day?
Thank you for your question. So, since the person is both body, mind, and soul, the body is necessary, or it is necessary to nurture the body, so through the incorporation of outdoor experience. So for example, this could look like a certain level of students in the classroom going outside with a teacher and experiencing or discovering the leaves in the trees or something like that. If they're learning the different types of trees, they go outside and find those trees or something like that. And then there's also, if it's not solely for learning, there's also just recreation outside or sports activity outside, which all nurture the body of the person. So.
Thank you, Colleen.